His will. That is one of the most sovereign passages you could imagine. God did it, God did it, God did it according to His will. I mean, it's over and over. So there you have in verse 5 and verse 11, you see predestined has nothing really to do about being predestined to a glorious body. He's talking about being predestined, clearly speaking of salvation, and clearly giving God every bit of the credit for His will. So in
that context, predestination is all about the will of God.
Yes.
In salvation.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
So
that's dangerous, Jeff.
That is dangerous. I didn't mean to read that. So I'll not read that. I'll scratch that on my Bible. Anyway, so that's the next two occurrences. So that's 4. The 5th one was in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 7. And this one, I had to read the whole section on this one because, again, we like context. So I'm going to start at verse 4, and I'm actually going to read to 14 because it's so important. There's just so many little verses. I remember growing up Arminian, which everybody seems to nowadays, but little verses that I always quote, and I never really knew what they meant. I kind of knew what they meant, but now I'm sitting there reading them in the context, like, oh my gosh, wow, look what that means. But in the context here, we're talking about the natural man being those who can't understand God because they don't have the Spirit, and only the Spirit of God knows God's mind. And we know it now because we have the Spirit of God, so therefore it took the Spirit of God for us to understand the things of God. Anyway, so here I will start in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 4. My speech and my proclamation were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but with a demonstration of the Spirit and power, so that your faith might not be based on men's wisdom, but on God's power. However, among the mature we do speak a wisdom, but not a wisdom of this age, or of the rulers of this age, who are coming to nothing. On the contrary, we speak God's hidden wisdom in a mystery, which God predestined before the ages for our glory. So here we have predestined, clearly speaking of this wisdom that was hidden, which He declared before all time. None of the rulers of this age knew it, for if they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, and no ear has heard, and what has never come into a man's heart is what God has prepared for those who love Him. Now God has revealed them to us by His Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the deep things of God. For who among men knows the concerns of a man except the spirit of the man that is in him? In the same way, no one knows the concerns of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, in order to know what has been freely given to us by God. That's how I know, because the Spirit gave me that ability to do it. It clearly says it right there. We have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, in order to know what has been freely given to us by God. We also speak these things, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual things to spiritual people. But the natural man does not welcome what comes from God's Spirit because it is foolishness to him. He is not able to know it since it is evaluated spiritually. So there you go. He cannot know it. The only one who can know that, and that's why I read that whole thing, because the argument was that Paul's going, hey, it wasn't me. In fact, I think right before that, he says, I came in humbleness and meekness, and it was not me. It was in the Spirit and power of God. Just like man, you can make judgments on me all day, but you don't know really what I feel inside in my own spirit, how things are. And he says, it's the same way with God. Only the Spirit of God knows the things of God. And we know those things because the Spirit has revealed them to us. And by the way, the natural man, he can't. He is not able to because he does not have the Spirit.
And in that context, the word predestinate shows up again.
Right.
Predestined.
This is that hidden wisdom. Right. So that was our fifth example. That's the fifth one. Now the sixth one, I believe, because it was the only other time I could see that actual word foreknow appear, but it is not the exact word. It's a very close term, though, but it is still translated predestined. And I will read that one, and I was like, oh boy, no wonder you sure don't want to quote that one. This is in Acts 4. And in the context here, Peter and John, they had just been released from prison. They get out of prison and they come back to the fellowship and are real excited to explain all the great, wonderful things God had done. And here is what they said in response. And when they heard this, they lifted their voices to God with one accord and said, O Lord, it is you who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, who by the Holy Spirit, through the mouth of our father David, your servant, said, Why did the Gentiles rage, and the peoples devise futile things? The kings of the earth took their stand, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. For truly, now that was him quoting David. Now back in Acts 4, verse 27, for truly in this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your purpose predestined to occur. Well, we see predestined there again, and yep, we're not talking about salvation there, we sure aren't, but we are talking about, I think this is beautiful, and you want to talk about human responsibility and divine sovereignty. Yep, you see it there. Human responsibility did exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to kill the Prince of Life. And they did exactly what God, it says, to do whatever your hand and your purpose predestined to occur. Exactly what God had predestined to occur. So there's where you see man putting his part in, sure does, and it's always evil. You see God putting his part in, and God's part is always to accomplish his goals, and that was the salvation of his people. So
now you've read the 6 places in the New Testament where Greek language is translated predestined in some form,
right.
Predestinated in those verses you just read. Brady said that 4 out of 6 times that it's used, it's referring to Christians getting glorified bodies. Is that true?
I don't think so. I don't see how we could have read what I just read and said that has anything to do with being predestined to glorified bodies.
Well, there we go.
So, okay.